Okay. Alright, so I think you can see me now. Maybe. Who knows? Alright, so this is the original assembly, Noah. And if you look, inside of... Yeah, let's see how we're going to do this. Support bar, right? So let's make the... support bar invisible. Okay. So we have on the back of it, this... in the inside, sorry, this nut welded to that end cap, and what that's doing is it's preventing this whole this assembly right here from sliding back, right? Because it's going to hit that nut and it's not going to slide back. And so what it's going to do is when it compresses this spring, this screw is going to stay rigid, and you know this whatever part will slide back like that. And that's what's gonna rub up against the gear, and that's bad. Okay, so I kind of half thought it through with the design with the washer. I guess I was too tired when I was building the assembly to like actually finish thinking it through. But I welded this nut in the wrong spot. So what I want to do is I say, okay, take this nut and remove it. So we go ahead and take the I don't know if you can even see this, the 5/16 nuts. Okay, and we go ahead and we suppress the feature. Oh, suppress it. Okay, so that's gone. That nut's no longer there. I know the weld for it is, but just the nut's no longer there. Alright, so now this assembly can move, well, it's constrained by these two nuts, okay? So it's free to move backwards now, okay? Now, that's good and all, but this might still move, this tray or whatnot might still move back because it's not locked in place. What I'm thinking is we'll go ahead and we'll get rid of one of these nuts, right? And we'll take this one and we'll weld it in that spot. And when we weld it in that spot, that will prevent this from unscrewing, okay? So it's, you know, right? And then on the other side of it, so on this side of the tray or whatnot, we'll have another nut. Maybe two. We'll tighten them real tight. Actually, we only need one because it has the spring tension. So just the one nut, and we'll tighten this tight. So that way the tray is basically locked, and it has to move with this screw. Okay. Now, that's cool and all, but to adjust the tension on it, or just, you know, how far the spring is preloaded, we have to change the distance between this plate here and the distance between this tray, right? So you can imagine, here, where's the bar? Support bar cap, support bar assembly, support bar. Okay, so we'll make that visible now, right? So you can imagine if this distance between this tray and the plate back there decreases, right? This is going to ride up on this slot. And then if you loosen the nut that was holding in place, the spring will unload, and the distance between this tray and that plate will increase, and that will drive the sprocket forward. So you'd have a longer, like a softer tension on it, and a longer time before it, you know, physically physically can't move anymore. Or what you could do is you can tighten it up and you can make it shorter, so you can have just a very little bit of wiggle room before it like doesn't allow the chain to move any farther, you know. So that's how you adjust it. Now, in order to do that, because you can see those nuts are inside and it's impossible to adjust once we put the thing in there without taking the whole thing apart, what we're gonna do is, where was the support bar again? We'll make that invisible. Is get rid of this nut. We don't need it. Okay, suppress. Get rid of this washer. We don't even have it, but you know, whoops, we were supposed to add a washer in there. My bad. Weld this nut directly to this plate. Okay, and that's gonna make sure that this nut, this plate is gonna move with this nut, which is gonna move, you know, in relation to the screw. Now, because this is a square and it's inside that bar, it's not going to be able to rotate, right? So this is effectively not going to be able to rotate, but when you start turning the screw, the screw is going to want to move, and because this is free to move back and forth, it's going to push this plate back and forth, right? Wait, hold on. Because if we weld that there, oh, will it? It should, because we're going to adjust this. Oh, yeah, it will. Okay, but I'm not thinking. When we weld this there, right, and this is free to move back and forth, this plate and this nut is going to go smack up against this rear wall, right? Or the nut. I know we're going to drill out the nut, but, it will be limited by how far back it will go. So this will only go that far back, okay? Now, so this nut will go all the way to this plate, and then when we start to turn the screw, right, this won't be able to rotate, so instead it will just start compressing this spring. And when you compress the spring, right, you shorten it, and you'll basically make the tensioner more stiff, right? It will be more rigid because it will only be able to give a little bit before it actually changes from a dynamic tensioner that has that spring that can adjust and just giving constant, not moving anymore and just building up the tension on the chain. So that's how we're going to adjust it. So we're going to weld that to there, and then we're going to weld on the end. We probably won't weld on the end just so that we can take it off apart, but we'll have two nuts like this on the very end so that when we tighten, turn those two nuts, it will turn this rod here, or the screw, and it will, move this plate back and forth. Because remember, this plate's going to be compressed up against this end cap here. The other thing is these screws here, or these nuts here, we really don't need them, but we'll leave them there. The only thing that they're going to be doing is, if you can imagine, here's the support bar. They're just going to be getting rid of this slack here, right? Because if you make the support bar like this, you can see that this gear will be like really loose for the first little bit of it, because it's just wiggling. Where's the support bar? It's just wiggling this part right here, this distance here. So it's going to be really loose for the first part of it, and then it will hit this, this will hit the back plate, and then it will start compressing the spring, and then we'll actually get the tension on it. These two nuts we'll just have there to get rid of that looseness. So you can imagine you just tighten these nuts finger tight, and it does is it just takes out this slack right here, so that when you have the support, so when you have the sprocket here, it won't be able to go any further out. It will be limited to, and you always have that tension from the spring. Yeah, and then when you tighten up this nut or whatnot, these nuts will come out, and then we'll just finger tight them again, right? Because this is going to be pulled in when that spring shortens. Yeah, that's about it. So that's the idea. So basically, to fix it, what we're going to do is we're going to have to drill through the end cap nut, that nut in the end cap, basically just get rid of it because it wasn't supposed to be there. Weld a nut onto that square washer or that plate thing. Visible. Onto this thing. Weld a nut onto that. We'll get a new piece because we already welded one thing here and one thing in the front. We're going to just go chop on the end of it, take the whole thing out, and we'll probably just get that 6-inch piece that we already cut out, because 6 inches is actually pretty perfect size, and we'll use that instead. We'll only weld one nut in the front here, and also by welding the nut here, we don't have to use the two of them, and that makes sure that we have enough space between the nut and the sprocket so they don't hit. And we'll tighten the nut in the back. We only need the one nut on the back because the spring tension is going to basically make it, the nut won't want to loosen because it's got the spring on it, right? And if it wants to loosen, it will loosen a little bit, but the spring's going to just spin it back the other way. So it won't really unscrew itself that direction, and it's not going to go through the metal, so you only need the one nut. So we'll do that. We'll put a nut in the other way, and that will lock this tray to this this screw here, and then that's about it. So yeah, drill out the nut and the back plate right here, weld this nut here, replace the rod because we kind of screwed that up, so we're gonna have to cut it, take it out, replace it, and then on the replaced one, just weld a nut here, and then add a nut behind there, and then for this end, we'll just put two more. So if you can imagine, there's two nuts like this. We'll put two more on the very end, and we'll use that to adjust the. Actually, no, we don't even need that because we can just use these two nuts, right? Because you imagine you keep tightening these. Eventually, this will hit that back plate, and then if you tighten it more, you'll. Wait, maybe we do need it. Because if you keep tightening it, you'll shorten it. But if you loosen it to the point where it's maximum loose, then you'll have this gap. Oh, yeah, that's another thing. So we have to make sure, right, when this is all the way loose, these springs here, push this sprocket all the way to the front of the slot here. So if I measured it the first time, it was 2.5 inches is how big our spring is. So we have to make sure that the distance from this rod here the distance from this plate here to the very back of it is the same length of our spring. So this is obviously more than 2.5 inches. So what we could do is we could get another spring and add that in there, so if we, instead of having two springs, I think it's like, we'd probably have to get 4 springs. We'll probably buy another pack of springs and we'll add it, and that way we'll always have spring pressure. Because right now, right, if you imagine, if you loosen this all the way, again, you're gonna have this slack here, and this springs will. I mean, I guess it would still work. It's just the springs would be kind of sloppy. They wouldn't work because they're just wiggling around. They're not actually touching each other, right? Because this back plate again would be pushed up all the way against this end here. So if you kept loosening it, yeah. So we need a longer spring. I mean, because we don't need it, but if you keep loosening it, right, this back plate's just going to keep going down, down, down until it hits this end, and then you're just going to have springs there, and the tensioner is just going to be, not really functional. So I guess it's not a bad thing, because by adding a longer spring, we basically increase how much we can adjust the spring tension, right? And then what we might be able to do too, is on the support bar, we can probably cut this slot deeper in, so we can have more of adjustment, right? But we want this to be in the loosest state. We want this to be all the way to the front, and then that way you have all this area to to have spring compression in, and then when you get to the very end of it, you'll hit this part here, and then you won't be able to compress the spring anymore. And then when you tighten the spring up all the way, right, you'll basically, this sprocket will be all the way to this side of the slot, and you wouldn't be able to compress it anymore because the spring would theoretically already be fully compressed. So you'd be hitting the dead wall there. So yeah, that's what we're doing, which means we need more springs and some stuff like that. All right, I think I've been rambling on long enough. I'll go ahead and I'll stop recording.